kitchen and had books stockpiled on top of each other just to like hold up a couple of things. And now I have a couple of fancy things now, so yay, growth. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I think it fits the vibe really well. I think it really, makes me happy, so in turn, hopefully it makes you happy as well, because this should be more soothing. But, leave a comment below if you like it. So, I'll stop rambling now. Welcome to the space, and let's dive into tonight's true crime story. I am very happy about last week's video because I have so much leftover wine. And the wine I'm drinking today, Conviction, which I think I enjoyed. I don't think that... Did I rate this yet? I'm giving it an 8. This is an 8. It's very good. I still stand by my other... What was my other ones? Good. Maybe this is the one I was hammered on when I tried. Alright everyone, get yourselves nice and comfortable. Ease your minds. If you didn't have that great of a day, well, that's what I'm here for. To distract you and remind you that it's all good. Take some time for yourself with this video. Grab yourselves a glass of wine like I have, a tea, get your cross stitching ready, some watermelon. You guys gave me so much for this intro that I can't honor them all, but don't worry, I've saved a lot for next week. And get ready to drift away to the life and twisted events of Russell Williams. Now, of course, with all true crime stories, the details are quite graphic in their nature. The content is dark, and I rarely do a verbal disclaimer. I don't know if you guys actually read the information I put on the videos, but I always do put something in there. But I just thought for this video, I would let you guys kind of know what you are getting into. And generally, although a lot of these stories, of course, there's an uncomfortable value to it, this one made me uneasy. So I'm just going to give you a heads up that if any sort of weird perversions, potentially underage acts make you very uncomfortable like they do me, this is just your warning that we may be diving into a couple of things like that. It is not the entire story, but there's just a lot in this. However, I do think it is important to present all of the details. It's especially a good reminder to women, everyone really, that anyone in a suit, uniform, medals, titles, evil comes in every possible way that your mind can imagine. So sleep tight, guys. Get ready for tonight's video. So, David Russell Williams was born in Broomsgrove, England on March 7th in 1963. His family and himself had immigrated to Canada, to Chalk River, Ontario. I'm not sure what exactly the timeline was for them moving, but after their relocation, the Williams family, which consisted of Russell, his father Cedric, who worked at the Canadian Premier Nuclear Research Laboratory, and his mother Christine, and became very close with the neighboring family in the area, the Sofkas. I'm just really bad at names. But although things seemed to be going well, when Russell was 6 years old, his parents had actually divorced, and his mother Christine had ended up remarrying to the neighboring friend's Dr. Jerry Sovka. I actually know someone where this happened in their family, but it was an actual switch. I don't think it was intentional in the moment, but it literally ended up being his mother and father divorced, and like a few months later, the father was dating the wife on the other side, and the mother was dating the father. Anyway, it made for an interesting wedding because they all remarried to each other, but that's not this story. With Russell, once this divorce happened, his mother and himself had moved to Scarborough, Ontario, and and he ended up actually taking his stepfather's name, at least for a little while. But while in the Scarborough area, over time, over the years, he began high school at Birchmount Collegiate, but finished at Upper Canada College. He had a classic first job, so classic, delivering newspapers. I used to do that. And he learned to play the piano and trumpets and really enjoyed and had a passion for photography. By 1979, his family had moved to South Korea, so a pretty big jump, where his stepfather was overseeing a reactor project. Russell had actually ended up staying in Ontario for this so that he could complete his 2 final years of high school, which is fair because that's a really hard time to move. And he stayed there as a boarding student at Upper Canada College while his parents had moved to South Korea. In his final year in 1982, he was selected as the prefect for his boarding house. He was incredibly organized, enjoyed structure and order, and was more than willing to direct anyone to achieve anything that he had needed. Williams then ended up studying economics and political science at the University of Toronto. Ended up graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in 1986. Russell ended up engaging in a lot of pranks against his roommates. It was kind of his thing. He was actually known for it heavily. He would pick locked doors, hide in rooms for hours, like commit to the bit, all in order to surprise his roommates. Now, that does seem fine and dandy, but he sort of started the trend to scare his roommates, to scare his friends. But he's sitting in there sometimes for hours straight, just waiting for them, waiting for a good time to scare them. And I'm just gonna say right now, if it's me reading a story about you and your name is in this title, maybe that little cute behavior that you used to have isn't so cute anymore, or was. While attending U of T, he even had pranked the university office where he was hired part-time at the personnel office. He would break into the manager's office and pull off elaborate pranks, filling the entire room with paper from head to toe, their office, their chairs, their computers, everything, and then take pictures of them and their reactions. But aside this fun little thing that he had where he could break into any place, anyone's room, privately, them not even notice, he did have another side to him. Russell never really shared much of his background with his friends. He never really opened up much. He'd never seen his family and would spend weekends and vacations in residence, often alone. And this is while he was at U of T. Friends said throughout school that they'd only ever seen him have one girlfriend, and it led to an incredibly nasty breakup that was really tough on him and hurtful. He couldn't really ever get over it. From age 20 on, he actually wasn't known to have any love interests in his life until roughly around 30 years old, so 10 years of celibacy. Yeah. But this ended up being pretty good for him. This propelled him to heavily focus on schooling, but also to focus on a new career in the military. He used this time to have no distractions, no women, and yes, although he studied economics, he told his friends, you know what, I actually think that I want to become an Air Force pilot, fly jets. I mean, hey, like, live your life. But his friends kind of thought this was a little weird. He'd spent so many years in school in something completely unrelated, and it was actually right after he graduated that he decided he wanted this huge change, and it was nothing he'd ever spoke of. His friends had ended up saying that he was heavily inspired by Tom Cruise in Top Gun, and this was actually more concerning for them because they really thought Russell absolutely crushed it. He'd destroyed his goals. He ended up making that fantasy a complete reality and became one of Canada's top pilots. Not flying fighters, however, but transport planes to war zones and areas of natural disasters. He'd even flew jets carrying prime ministers and other VIPs across the country and around the world. This included the Queen of England and the Duke of Edinburgh, so he was carrying some very high profile people around. He was actually regarded as a model military officer over the course of his 23-year career. Promoted to captain in 1991, posted to a 434 Combat Support Squadron in Nova Scotia, and ended up earning a Master's in Defense Studies and was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. Things progressed quite well for him. He then was appointed to commanding officer to 437 Transport Squadron at CFB, Trenton, Ontario, and continued to have an incredibly successful career. I'm honestly just going over it really quickly for you guys right now, but we're gonna get over it. And he was even sworn in as the wing commander at CFB Trenton, which is a very big deal. It is Canada's busiest air transport base, and anyone in the Canadian military going overseas leaves from this area. So if you are going to Iraq, anywhere, you are going through this base. So he'd worked hard and he did quite well, being described by others as an elite pilot and a shining bright star of the military. Well, honestly, I'm sure he did great. I'm sure that he was an awesome military person because, he succeeded. And even so much so that after things in this story unraveled, people that had worked with him in the military, all they really had to say was, he was good at his job at least. People said that. And things ended up getting weird, as they do. Those closest to him, even his closest friend in college, who'd emceed his wedding for him, did not know much, if anything at all, about his personal life. On June 1st in 1991, Russell ended up marrying Mary Elizabeth Harriman. Now, that should be great. Finding the love of your life is fantastic, right? Well, his closest friend, Jeff, as I was mentioning, was shocked to find out that he was even getting married. He thought it was bizarre. And he hadn't been dating since university, so when people found out that he was getting married out of nowhere, there was definite confusion. The relationship that he had had with his wife was often long distance, as Russell had worked out of Trenton, close to the military base, and Mary worked out of Ottawa. But the two had a home together in Orleans, a suburb of Ottawa, as well as a cottage in Tweed. Tweed is a very small town between Toronto and Ottawa. The property was a lakefront home on Cozy Cove Lane, but exited her home while she was pulling up into the garage. He had jumped out from her front door through the patio and ran away. Kind of horrifying. No thank you. So she'd phoned her father, went inside, and saw nothing was missing. Nothing out of the ordinary, at the least. She actually thought it was just some kids in town messing around, breaking in for fun. No one thought anything of it, in fact, but it was after that specific moment many break-ins throughout the community of Tweed had been reported. But these break-ins were pretty odd as well. It seemed like whoever was entering wasn't interested in stealing cash, grabbing electronics, but stealing women's lingerie or panties. It ended up becoming such a common occurrence in the neighborhood that some people didn't even report it or even notice it when they'd walk in. They just kind of brush it off. Almost all of these occurrences as well were on Cozy Cove Lane. Not all, but almost all. Isn't that peculiar? No, it's not. Nothing is peculiar in these cases. You've all seen the title. We all know who did this. A year later, in 2008 to 2009, the same events were starting to happen in the Orleans suburb in Ottawa. In fact, there were 34 reported break-ins or attempted break-ins in the area that resulted in the theft of hundreds of females' undergarments, which were all close to Russell's home. But honestly, it didn't matter how close it was to his home, because who would assume that it was him? This high-profile military man had these amazing jobs and was kind of revered by his peers. No one would think it was him. Not yet, at least. Not for a while, might I say. But you'll see. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Russell was sworn in as wing commander in Trenton, which is an incredible amount of pressure on someone, and his demands increased as he was responsible for the welfare of was the third and final time that Russell had broken into her home. He'd use duct tape to cover her eyes and would just stop raping her to take photos. So apparently as well, she had asked him if he was going to kill her, and all he said was, no need for that. But this was the third time, and not only the duct tape, but apparently out of the 3 times, the first and third time, she had actually ran into him, and he had assaulted her. So, no, like, you break into my house one time, and I'm getting a roommate, or I'm like getting some sort of security system. Like this woman, this poor, and she was older too, so she may not have been able to afford it. That's incredibly rough. Now, as I mentioned, people didn't know who to blame. The media was covering the break-ins, and in fact, police had actually went into each home in the neighborhood of Cozy Cove. But sorry, my camera just collapsed and almost smacked me in the face. So hopefully this doesn't look too different. I don't know, or sound different. What was I saying? When police officers had actually reached Russell's home, there was no answer. So when the neighbors had answered close by, and police asked who'd lived next door, and he'd explained who he was, what his title was, officers literally said to them, "Oh, well, there's no point going to that house then." Little did they know. Before long, police actually thought that they'd found their man. Russell's neighbor, who he'd fish with, whom he'd have overs for dinner, Larry, one of the men whose daughter had called him saying that someone entered her home. That Larry. Upon interviewing one of the victims, whom had been blindfolded, she had claimed that she'd recognized the man's voice that was attacking her, and guessed that it was Larry, which is incredibly unfortunate for him. But apparently, it took 3.5 hours of interrogations, fingerprints, DNA, over 3 hour actually, polygraph exam, and weeks of follow-up before the police had told him he was no longer a suspect. But that didn't really matter, because to the neighborhood, he was guilty, and he was judged very harshly going forward. There was actually one more event that took place before the tipping point, I'd call it, which was Anna, and there's a couple of people's names in here. I am not French Canadian. I will butcher it. Anna Marsan's birthday. So on a road between Tweed and Belleville is where Anne, a woman who taught music at the Trenton Air Base, had lived. Anne got home, was very excited for her birthday, and decided to change before she went out. Now, when she'd gotten to her bedroom, she had noticed that her bedside dresser had been opened. Her drawers were pulled out, and her sex toys were actually gone. She first thought someone was playing some kind of really weird joke on her. Thankfully, when her neighbor had come to pick her up, she was already ready, and they debated calling the police. But the neighbor said, "You know what? You will just become a butt of some joke while the police officers are all having coffee. Woman's dildos were stolen. I'll just take your things. You can come sleep at my house for the night, and in the morning we'll reassess everything." So sure enough, that's exactly what they did. The neighbor had grabbed a couple things for her. They'd went through, secured the building, deadbolted the kitchen door from the inside, and exited the home. The following morning, however, as her neighbor was dropping her off and she was checking things out in her home, she had went up into her office. It turns out the intruder, Russell, was in the home with them while they were debating on calling the police and listening to everything they were saying. Not only was he there during that conversation, he was probably there beforehand while Anne was getting ready for judge your really big dildos. She then ran into her bedroom, had seen all of her drawers that had her underwear and personal items pulled open and completely bare, absolutely empty, to which she'd let a blood-curdling scream. She freaked out. She absolutely freaked out and phoned the police. Now what's interesting is, like I said, Anne lived on a road between Tweed and Belleville, but was technically within the Belleville jurisdiction. So she'd not met with the police officers of Tweed who'd been dealing with the break-ins, and upon talking to them, and she'd mentioned she was believed there was this connection with all of the break-ins going on in Tweed. The officers didn't know what she was talking about. They heard nothing of any sort of weird events or break-ins coming in from Tweed. And like I said, things just went from really creepy to way worse soon enough. And Anne tried her best to spread the message to all to be cautious, people in her community, people that she'd worked with, people at the airbase. And the warnings, unfortunately, were not enough. So on November 25th in 2009, the body of Marie France a military flight attendant who had worked at the CFB Trenton, was found in her home. She had lived alone with her 2 cats and was known to be a free spirit, an artist, and genuinely in love with life. The cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation and was considered to be a suicide initially, but upon further investigation was reclassified as murder. Things took a bit of time with this case, but this was the first murder that had been committed. The day the police had found her body, Russell was handcuffed and photographed as part of a publicity stunt for the local United Way fundraising campaign, and they were all laughing in their photographs. When he was officially informed of Marie's death, he'd even wrote a letter to her family, sending his condolences and saying that if they needed anything, he would be there for them. Well, on November 16th of 2009, Russell had broken into Brighton, Ontario, where he'd taken some pictures of himself in her underwear, then left. But he'd actually returned 8 days later. After hiding in her basement for about a half an hour, Russell had attacked her with a flashlight, knocked her out, bound her, covered her mouth with duct tape, took some photos, and dragged her up into the bedroom. He had then set up a video camera and raped her repeatedly. She continued to struggle against him and begged for him to spare her life and leave. He'd repeatedly told her to shut up and put duct tape over her nose, which is why she had suffocated to death. Williams had then cleaned up and drove to Ottawa the next day for a meeting. He was very good at balancing this weird life of perfect worker in the public eye, in the media, dedicated husband on the weekends, and this. Now, the murder of the 38-year-old must have temporarily satisfied something, because Russell didn't actually strike again for nearly 2 months. No break-ins, no nothing. But when he did, this would be his last. On January 27th of 2010, he had drove past the Belleville home of 27-year-old Jessica Lloyd as she was working out on a treadmill. He had actually later told detectives that he thought she was cute, and so he broke into her home the following night as she slept, which, by the way, is my biggest nightmare, is someone into my home as I sleep, not breaking in with a gun saying, "Where's your things? I know why you're here. I know why you're here if you're doing that." Someone slowly entering my home. I don't know your intent. I don't know what you want. It creeps me out. That's my biggest fear. So he'd entered her home as she slept, and again, he'd beat, bound, put duct tape over her eyes, and set up a video camera. He had then raped her repeatedly for hours, pausing only to take photos. At around 8 p.m., almost 20 hours after he'd first entered and started his attacks on her, he told her he would take her home. But as they were leaving, he had struck her on the head and strangled her to death. He wrapped her body in a blanket and then left it in the garage. Now, that was a Friday. Williams had drove to the base that evening, flew the following day, and spent the rest of the week at his home in Ottawa with his wife. He had returned to Tweed the following Tuesday, February 2nd, and disposed of the body in a wooded area not far from his home, sometime around midnight. Now, Jessica's appearance was certainly noticed. She was very popular, and her family was very well known. She was considered the girl next door of the area, and once she went missing, a lot of people were on edge, and there was a general sense of uneasiness in the air. By then, Ontario Provincial Police were actually investigating and had found distinctive tire tracks and boot prints near Jessica's home. On the evening of Thursday, February 4th, they erected a roadblock on Highway 37, which connects Belleville and Tweed. Every motorist was stopped as cops tried to find a match. Among those stopped was Russell Williams, and luckily for them, he was driving his Pathfinder and not his BMW. Cops had made a preliminary match and invited Williams in for questioning that Sunday, February 7th. Now, you can actually watch the interviews that Russell was a part of on YouTube. I definitely took a look. It is hours of footage, but also incredibly entertaining to watch him squirm. So when Russell had kind of entered the frame of the video in the interrogation room at the Ottawa Police Headquarters, he was very calm, confident, chewing gum as he chatted with Detective Smith, like he didn't have a care in the world, but was just this person so eager to help. He was offered a coffee and the opportunity to call a lawyer, turned both down. Nothing to hide here. And they had then went over his whereabouts for the past week or so. Smith, the detective, kind of sat back, not really consulting notes, just sort of offering small encouragements to Russell as he had built his story. At that point early on, Russell seemingly super cocky and was telling the detective his concerns and his worries that being questioned by the police might be embarrassing not only to the Canadian forces but to the police officers and Detective Smith himself. And he'd asked Smith if they could be discreet about this because he was just really there to help out. And Smith said they'd definitely try their best. But he did took a little while. He just sort of nodded a lot, being like, yeah, sure, I don't know what to say. Well, you shouldn't. But then came the kicker, is Detective Smith had laid out documents in front of him and telling him that these were search warrants that were executed at his homes in Ottawa and Tweed, and that his vehicle has been seized. Detective Smith had also told him that his wife knows what's going on. Yeah. So as Smith was going through this, adding that they expect a completed analysis of DNA on Marie France's body, that William's office was then going to be searched, that his credibility was vanishing, and that he doesn't think that he's a psychopath, and that the search for Jessica's body will continue until they find her. Russell was then kind of coming to grips with everything, that the end of his life as he knew it was crumbling in front of him, but he still only continued to nod, stare at the photos, think about what he was gonna do. And there was about an hour and a half of the detective simply calmly and almost reassuringly tell Russell that, like, yeah, your life's kind of over, it's all over. Just trying to get him to say it, you know. Now, the one constant that Russell displayed throughout the interrogation was his concern for his wife and how he wanted to minimize the investigation on her. And that's when he really started to fold and agreed to tell Smith everything: where to find Jessica's body, how he'd broken into the homes of his victims, what he did to them. And the details are very gross, like I said earlier, disclaimer on this video. And it made it even more so gross by how expressionless he was as he went over everything. These graphic details that he could just sit there and be like, and then I did this. Yeah, that was me. I mean, I don't expect much remorse from him, but just uncomforting to watch as someone who's empathetic. He'd even told Smith where to find memory cards that he had used to record videos and take photos of everything. Now, most of the places he had originally been breaking into, and for the most part, were young underage girls' homes, where he would enter their bedroom. And these are girls that were as young as 9 to 15, and then of course the ones that he'd assaulted were quite older. But to the younger victims, he would enter their rooms, take a photo of their bedroom. He would then dress himself in their underwear or lingerie if they were older, and take photos of himself. I will insert them as I am describing this. He would kind of have one where it was very front on, and another where he'd be peering over the shoulder. Then lay on the girls' beds and masturbate. And quite a few people who had reported this, and had people investigate the area, had DNA found on their bedside tables, their mattresses, and there must be something so creepy, horrifying when you're a parent. And not only was your home broken into, the only thing stolen was your daughter's underwear, but there is male ejaculate in their room. Like, your daughter's never sleeping alone again. No, that is, yeah. Anyway, so the memory cards that he had been speaking to also included photos and video footage from the sexual assaults. And the detective let him say everything, was as calm as ever. Smith, your professionalism on point. At one point, psychology at the University of Saskatchewan had said people don't just wake up in the morning and think, you know what, I'm going to become a sexual sadist today, and I'm going to sexually assault and torture and murder a female colleague today. So the thing is, where on earth did this come from? The psychologist suspects that the first break-in in September of 2007 wasn't William's first experience giving in to these desires. His quote is, "The guy could have been stealing clothes from friends and acquaintances, shopping malls, even clotheslines. He could have been having fantasies of bondage and so forth, and could have been aggressive with his partners sexually, but flying under the radar. And over time, fantasy and maybe loosely consenting partners didn't quite fit the bill, and there was an escalation in severity that Russell probably felt." Now, according to Ennis, the forensic psychologist based out of University of Alberta, what up? Hi, I went there. Hey. He had said that people like Russell can manage their behaviors in ways that don't bring them to the attention of the authorities. They can sit back and resist and wait for an opportune moment, depending on the balance between the push of the drive and how good their impulse control is. And it looks like Russell's escalating. He gets more and more preoccupied with his deviant sexual fantasies, so the push became stronger than the impulse control. So you could see him over time get sloppy. So in the 7 years since his arrest, both the Canadian Armed Forces and the residents of the Tweed-Belleville area in Toronto, Ontario, have been trying to put Russell Williams behind them. And here I am, bringing him back up. Been dishonorably discharged from the Canadian military, stripped of his ranks, his medal and commission scroll, confirming his status as an officer in the RCAF, were destroyed. The vehicle he used to abduct Jessica was also crushed. However, he will still continue to receive a pension. Okay, so in Belleville, Tim Durkin said that the community still reveres the military, although the Russell Williams case deeply shook that. While it was still unfolding, people are trying to move on from it at the same time. For people connected directly to it, they will never be able to move on. I think that the community will never be quite the same as it was before, but at the same time, I think people are incredibly resilient and able to overcome a lot. So that was a lot. Oh my god. How long has this been on my face? We'll find out in editing. I try not to look at the viewfinder much when I'm recording. So you guys,